Fed policy leads the brief after Kevin Warsh spoke following a decision to leave interest rates unchanged. Reuters reports Warsh said inflation should remain tied to a 2% goal, while PBS and The Hill carried his remarks as investors looked for guidance. The issue is whether policymakers describe inflation as contained enough to keep borrowing costs steady. Markets, banks, and households will read the next Fed minutes and any vote split for clues about mortgage rates, business credit, and savings yields. CNBC adds that Warsh's communication style is being tested by markets that want clarity without premature promises. Watch next for the Federal Reserve minutes, an official vote record, or a new statement that changes rate guidance. The broader consequence is household timing. A delayed cut keeps loan decisions cautious, while a surprise policy turn would quickly reach credit cards, auto loans, and business plans. That makes the written Fed record more important than market chatter. Policy desks will compare every phrase with prior guidance. The New York Times also reports rate officials split over the path ahead. So the concrete record to compare is the statement language, the minutes, and the next inflation reading. Not a single market reaction after the event, giving viewers a named sequence of evidence to check before accepting claims about a policy pivot or a promise. The Senate Judiciary Committee delayed a vote on Todd Blanche's nomination after Republican objections tied to a Trump-IRS audit settlement. Reuters reports Senator John Cornyn said Justice Department answers had not satisfied his concerns, and the Washington Post described a standoff with GOP holdouts. CNBC says the dispute centers on whether a fund shields President Trump and others from tax audits. The delay matters because the committee vote decides whether the nomination moves toward the full Senate. If the department gives new assurances, the nomination could resume. If not, the delay becomes a measure of intra-party resistance. Watch next for a rescheduled committee notice, a written Justice Department response, or public statements from Cornyn and Judiciary leaders. The fight also tests how much leverage individual Republican senators have over appointments when ethics or tax questions are attached. The durable evidence is the committee calendar, not anonymous spin about private negotiations. That record sets the next public checkpoint. NBC News and CNBC coverage make the procedural stakes clear. A nomination can stall when a senator demands written assurances, and the next public checkpoint is the committee calendar rather than private claims about a deal with the public paper trail showing whether the delay is procedural housekeeping or a real threat to confirmation in public with exact dates and named senators. Anthony Fauci is back in political focus through a Senate hearing and newly reported diary material from the COVID era. Reuters reports Fauci invoked the Fifth Amendment at a hearing led by Senator Rand Paul, while USA Today and the Washington Post summarized diary passages about Donald Trump, fame, and pandemic pressure. The story matters because the public record now combines sworn oversight questions with private notes from a central pandemic official. Diary excerpts may illuminate decision-making, but hearings and official transcripts determine what claims enter the congressional record. Viewers should separate documented testimony from political reaction around the documents. Watch next for the committee transcript, any follow-up subpoena or filing, and additional source-backed diary releases. The overlap is sensitive because pandemic decisions still shape trust in health agencies, congressional oversight, and public records. The strongest next update would name the document, speaker, and hearing date so claims can be checked directly. Dates and named records are the safeguard. CBS News and AP coverage of related diary takeaways show why the story remains contested. Lawmakers, health officials, and readers are using the same papers to argue about credibility, memory, and accountability, especially because official transcripts, dated excerpts, and named publishers let viewers distinguish documentation from partisan interpretation by date and source carefully with exact dates and named records. Airport immigration arrests are drawing attention to cooperation between TSA screening and ICE enforcement. CBS News says arrests have increased amid expanded collaboration, while USA Today describes a tactic aimed at travelers in U.S. airports. The New York Times reports airports are becoming a more visible front in deportation efforts. The stakes are practical for travelers, attorneys, and airport authorities because a domestic trip can now become an immigration enforcement checkpoint for some people. The key question is what written policy governs when information moves from screening to detention. Watch next for Department of Homeland Security guidance, court challenges from detained travelers, and airport or airline statements about how the process is applied. Immigration lawyers will look for patterns: who is stopped, whether warrants are shown, and whether domestic passengers receive notice of their rights. Any official memo would clarify whether these are isolated cases or a standing enforcement lane. That policy trail is the key evidence. Public rules matter. CNN and legal groups are likely to track whether travelers are stopped before boarding, after landing, or during routine identity checks. Because each setting carries different notice, counsel, and due process questions, and those details will determine whether the arrests reflect isolated enforcement choices or a broader operating policy in writing now today in practice with exact dates and agency signatures. A smoked bacon recall is affecting consumers in 3 states after more than 12,000 pounds were flagged for food safety risk. The Washington Post, Fox News, USA Today, and the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel all report the recall, with coverage pointing viewers toward affected product details. The concrete concern is whether packages already in refrigerators or stores match the recalled lots. Food recalls move quickly because the useful record is usually a product code, inspection notice, or expanded distribution list. Consumers should rely on the official recall notice and retailer instructions rather than social media summaries. Watch next for USDA or company updates listing lot numbers, sell-by dates, stores, and whether the recall expands. The recall is also a reminder that food safety news is most useful when it names labels, package sizes, establishment numbers, and where the product shipped. Those details determine whether a family should discard food or ignore a rumor. Retailer notices should match federal recall language. If a family bought bacon in July, the actionable step is to compare the package against official identifiers and retailer notices. Broad recall headlines alone do not say whether a specific refrigerator item is affected, and the safest response is to follow those identifiers before serving, returning, or discarding the product at home today safely with exact labels and store notices. Donald Trump and the Justice Department asked the Supreme Court to throw out the $83 million defamation verdict awarded to Jean Carroll. AP News and CNBC report the filing, and other outlets track the same request as it moved to the High Court. The legal significance is that a civil verdict now depends on whether the justices take up the petition and how they frame presidential immunity or federal involvement. Nothing changes for the judgment simply because a request was filed. The next action belongs to the court. Carroll's team can respond, and the justices can deny review or ask for more briefing. Watch next for the docket entry, response deadline, and any Supreme Court order. The petition also keeps attention on the boundary between private conduct, official duties, and federal representation. Those questions are procedural now, but a grant of review would turn them into a major Supreme Court term issue. The order list is the controlling record. CNBC and local reports are useful only insofar as they point back to filings. The decisive next record is whether the court requests briefing, distributes the petition for conference, or denies review without comment because Supreme Court procedure, not campaign rhetoric, determines whether the verdict is revisited or left standing this term with exact docket dates and orders. A Senate sanctions bill would give President Trump broad tariff authority as lawmakers debate pressure on Russia and countries that keep buying Russian goods. The New York Times reports the proposal would expand presidential tariff powers, while Indian and economic outlets are watching possible effects on trade partners. The immediate issue is legislative power. Congress would be authorizing a tool that could reshape customs costs before any tariff is imposed. That matters to importers, exporters, and allies because a sanctions vote can become a trade shock if the authority is used. The details will turn on bill text, amendments, and administration guidance. Watch next for the Senate vote schedule, revised text, and customs or diplomatic responses. The bill also creates a timing problem for businesses. Companies may have to plan around possible duties before they know rates, exemptions, or start dates. That uncertainty is why the exact statutory language matters. Traders will watch customs implementation dates closely. Bill language matters. The Times of India and the Economic Times are tracking India exposure, while Lower Bucks Times reports the bill's bipartisan Russia sanctions frame. Together, those sources show why foreign policy pressure and domestic tariff power are now linked, making committee amendments and customs instructions the documents that businesses, allies, and consumers need to monitor with exact bill text and amendments. Russia launched another missile attack on Kyiv, and early reports describe casualties and emergency response in the city. Reuters reports Russian strikes killed people in Ukraine and prompted Poland to scramble fighter jets, while CNN and Al Jazeera focused on ballistic missiles hitting Kyiv. The story matters because air defense alerts, casualty counts, and allied military movements show whether the attack stays local or widens the security response. Initial numbers can change as rescue crews reach damaged buildings, so the most reliable updates are official casualty statements and verified field reports. Poland's reaction also shows NATO members monitoring spillover risk. Watch next for Kyiv emergency service updates, Ukraine's military assessment, and statements from Poland or NATO air commands. The human cost remains central. Casualty figures, damaged housing, and power disruptions determine whether the attack becomes a short alert or a broader humanitarian emergency. Verified local updates should come before claims about strategy. Rescue reports should lead every casualty update. Fox News and other updates will matter only if they add verified casualty figures or official military statements. Repeated blast descriptions are less useful than named rescue agencies, hospital totals, and air defense reports, because those records separate confirmed damage from wartime claims and help measure whether Allied alerts are escalating after the strike today with exact casualty totals and agency names. U.S. forces say they thwarted an Iranian missile attack on American troops and then struck Iranian proxy targets in Iraq with support from Saudi forces. CBS News, AP News, and USA Today report the military account, including Central Command's description of a surprise missile threat. The stakes are regional because a defensive action can still trigger retaliation if Tehran or aligned militias answer with another strike. The legal and diplomatic record will matter as much as the battlefield details, especially if Congress seeks justification for the strikes. Energy markets and shipping lanes may also react if the exchange spreads. Watch next for Central Command updates, Iraqi government statements, Iranian responses, and any congressional notice about the operation. The account also raises questions about coordination with Iraq and Saudi Arabia because regional partners will want to avoid a wider cycle of retaliation. Confirmed statements from those governments will show whether the operation has diplomatic backing. Official notices will show the legal basis. ABC's international feed can help confirm how the claim is being reported outside Washington. But the key record remains Central Command language, Iraqi sovereignty statements, Saudi confirmation, and any public congressional notification, since those documents show whether the episode remains contained or becomes a wider regional confrontation next immediately and publicly now with exact command statements and dates. A Lebanese couple returning to a damaged home is putting a human frame around the U.S.-brokered arrangement between Israel and Lebanon. AP News and Timeslive report on families coming back to shattered homes, while other outlets followed the local return after fighting and displacement. The story matters because ceasefire language becomes real only when residents can safely re-enter neighborhoods, find basic services, and rebuild without renewed fire. A single family's return does not prove the deal is secure, but it shows what success or failure will look like on the ground. The next useful evidence is local, visible, and official. Watch next for municipal damage assessments, security statements, aid agency updates, and reports on whether more residents return or leave again. The couple's situation also shows why reconstruction is political as well as personal. People need safe roads, utilities, compensation, and confidence that armed groups will not restart fighting. Those are the measures to watch. Newsbreak and Inquirer references are secondary compared with AP's field reporting, but they show the return story is spreading through local and regional channels where residents look for road, aid, and security information. Because those basic facts reveal whether a diplomatic arrangement is changing daily life or only pausing danger temporarily in practice today with exact local reports and dates.